One of the most surprising stories of 2023 was the resilience of the European economy, which managed to avoid a recession despite facing multiple challenges. In this section, we will explore how the EU economy dodged a downturn thanks to lower energy prices, a strong job market and ongoing government stimulus. The first factor that helped the EU economy was the decline in gas prices, which had soared to record levels in late 2022 due to Russia's aggression against Ukraine and supply disruptions. The EU successfully diversified its energy sources, increased its renewable capacity and reduced its gas consumption, which brought down the cost of energy for households and businesses. According to the European Commission, the average gas price in the EU fell by 40% between November 2022 and February 2023. The second factor that supported the EU economy was the robustness of the labor market, which remained resilient despite the slowdown in activity. The unemployment rate in the EU fell from 6.9% in December 2022 to 6.5% in March 2023, thanks to the extension of job retention schemes, the easing of lockdown restrictions and the recovery of some sectors such as tourism and hospitality. The wage growth also picked up slightly, from 1.8% in 2022 to 2.1% in 2023, although it still lagged behind inflation. The third factor that boosted the EU economy was the continuation of fiscal stimulus, which provided a cushion for demand and investment. The EU maintained its fiscal stance at around 4% of GDP in 2023, mainly through the implementation of the Next Generation EU Fund, which aimed to support the green and digital transition of the bloc. The fund disbursed around €200 billion in grants and loans to member states in 2023, which helped finance projects such as infrastructure, innovation and social cohesion. Thanks to these three factors, the EU economy defied expectations and grew by 0.8% in 2023, up from the 0.3% that was predicted in November 2022. This was a remarkable achievement compared to other regions such as China and the US, which faced a recession or a slowdown in growth due to their own economic challenges. The EU also improved its outlook for 2024, with a projected growth rate of 1.7%, driven by stronger domestic demand, higher investment and improved external trade. In conclusion, the EU economy showed its strength and adaptability in 2023, overcoming a series of shocks that could have derailed its recovery. By lowering its energy costs, preserving its job market and stimulating its economy, the EU surprised everyone with its economic performance and proved that it was ready for the future. The EU economy has been recovering from the COVID-19 crisis thanks to a massive stimulus package, lower energy prices and a resilient labor market. However, the recovery has faced new challenges from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which disrupted trade and security in the region. Russia's military aggression against Ukraine in November 2022 sparked a diplomatic crisis and a wave of sanctions from the EU and its allies. The EU condemned Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and called for an immediate end to hostilities and a peaceful resolution of the conflict. The EU also expressed its solidarity with Ukraine and pledged to support its economic and political stability. The EU increased its humanitarian and development aid to Ukraine, as well as its assistance for energy security and reforms. The EU also mobilized additional funds for several programs and policies designed to help face the consequences of Russia's war of aggression. However, the EU also faced serious economic repercussions from the conflict. Trade between the EU and Russia, which was already affected by previous sanctions, suffered a further blow. The EU imports about 40% of its natural gas from Russia, and some of these supplies were cut off or reduced due to the war. This caused a spike in energy prices and a risk of shortages in some EU countries, especially in Eastern Europe. The EU responded by activating its Energy Solidarity Mechanism, which allows member states to share gas supplies in case of emergencies. The EU also accelerated its efforts to diversify its energy sources and reduce its dependence on Russian gas. The EU increased its imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, from other countries, such as the US and Qatar, and invested in renewable energy projects and infrastructure. The EU also intensified its cooperation with other partners, such as NATO and the US, to ensure a coordinated response to the crisis and a common stance on sanctions. The EU also reaffirmed its commitment to the Eastern Partnership, a framework for cooperation with 6 countries in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus, including Ukraine. The EU economy has shown resilience and adaptability in the face of these new challenges. The Recovery Plan for Europe has provided a strong boost to growth and investment, while supporting the green and digital transitions. The EU has also demonstrated its solidarity and unity in defending its values and interests, as well as those of its neighbors. One of the key elements of the EU's recovery plan from the pandemic and the war is the EU budget for 2023. This budget reflects the EU's commitment to support the green and digital transition and biodiversity, as well as to address the geopolitical consequences of the crisis. In this section, we will look at how the EU budget for 2023 allocated additional funding for several programs and policies to achieve these goals. First, let's talk about the green and digital transition. The EU budget for 2023 aims to contribute to the EU's climate targets by allocating at least 30% of its total expenditure to climate-related projects. This includes increased funding for programs such as Horizon Europe, which supports research and innovation, the Connecting Europe Facility, which funds sustainable transport and energy networks, and the LIFE program, which supports environmental and climate action. The EU budget for 2023 also supports the digital transition by allocating at least 20% of its expenditure to digital measures. This includes programs such as Digital Europe, which invests in digital infrastructure and skills, and Erasmus+, which promotes digital education and mobility. Second, let's talk about biodiversity. The EU budget for 2023 supports the EU's biodiversity strategy by allocating more funds to programs such as the Common Agricultural Policy, which promotes sustainable farming practices, and the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, which supports the conservation of marine ecosystems. The EU budget for 2023 also contributes to the global protection of biodiversity by increasing funding for the Neighborhood, Development and International Cooperation Instrument, NDICI, which supports cooperation with partner countries on environmental issues. Third, let's talk about the recovery from the pandemic and the war. The EU budget for 2023 provides essential funding for programs that help member states cope with the social and economic impact of the crisis. These include programs such as EU4Health, which strengthens national health systems and resilience, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which finances reforms and investments in line with the EU's priorities, and REACT-EU, which supports cohesion policy and regional development. The EU budget for 2023 also addresses the humanitarian and security challenges posed by the war in Ukraine by allocating more funds to programs such as humanitarian aid, civil protection, migration and asylum, border management and visa, military mobility, and security and defense. To sum up, the EU budget for 2023 is a crucial tool for supporting the EU's recovery from the pandemic and the war, as well as its green and digital transition and biodiversity. By allocating additional funding for several programs and policies in these areas, the EU budget for 2023 demonstrates the EU's solidarity and ambition for a more resilient and sustainable future.